Okay, after I agreed with Brian to make at his request to do a 40-year retrospective of CRM archaeology in Alberta, I realized what a huge topic it was, and it involves legislation and regulation, practice, thousands of projects, tens of thousands of sites, and scores of issues. I had to accept the fact that I could only provide a cursory overview. So what follows here undoubtedly will miss many aspects of what people will consider relevant, but I hope you'll bear with me.
You step a bit closer to the...
Okay, thank you, I will. Yeah, good. So to establish a basis for CRM archaeology in Alberta, we need to take a quick look at the review of the legislation that supports it. In 1973, 2 years before the Provincial Society was formed, what is now called the Alberta Historical Resources Act was proclaimed. Oops, I'm too far ahead. There we go. This groundbreaking legislation established Crown ownership of archaeological resources and ministerial responsibility for study, retention of materials, and conservation of resources threatened by developers. It also established a user's pay principle requiring developers at the minister's discretion to sponsor studies to assess and mitigate the effects of their proposed projects on archaeological resources. An associated permit regulation confirmed that only qualified archaeologists can complete such requirements. As most of you are aware, there are several key elements to the program established under this legislation to manage the effect of development on archaeological resources. Proposed activities need to be reviewed by government and requirements conveyed to developers. Developers need to engage archaeologists and permits need to be acquired. Field studies need to be undertaken to establish standards. Reports detailing the work and presenting recommendations need to be prepared and submitted to government, along with all materials and records. All of these materials need to be archived by government and made available for study. To meet these objectives of the new legislation, two major structures not previously in place were needed: a government agency to administer conservation measures and consultants to undertake the work. At first, developers became aware of requirements through conditions established by approval authorities like Alberta Environment. Archaeologists were contacted and the first CRM archaeological permits were issued in 1973. Anticipating the application of the new legislation, some of these archaeologists had formed limited companies to manage projects and finances and to engage staff, while others acted independently. Virtually all were graduates of the anthropology and archaeology programs at U of A and U of C. Over time, the professional community of consulting archaeologists formed one of the two pillars of the CRM process in Alberta. In 1973, only 2 of 12 archaeological permits issued were CRM projects directed at development impacts. 10 were research studies. By 1976, however, CRM permits numbered almost twice the number of research permits issued. So this graph shows the dramatic proportional increase in the numbers of permits issued in response to development compared to research-related studies. This trend reflects the pace of Alberta's development, as well as the increasing effectiveness of government systems for monitoring development activity and issuing requirements. Government responsibility for applying the new legislation is the other major pillar of the CRM process. In 1973, permit applications were sent to the Human History section of the Provincial Museum of Alberta and signed by the minister. But the broad range of responsibilities for archaeological heritage required a comprehensive program to meet its objectives. Under the leadership of Dr. Bill Byrne, the Archaeological Survey of Alberta, a branch of Alberta Culture, was established in 1974. Its primary focus was resource management in the face of development, with a secondary focus on research to assimilate accumulating knowledge and enhance future planning decisions. Together, Alberta's archaeological consulting community and the Archaeological Survey have a partnership that has evolved into one of the most thorough and comprehensive systems in Canada dedicated to conservation of archaeological heritage. That's not to say that the partnership has always been easy or that all of the impact of Alberta's development over the last 40 years has been avoided or compensated for. However, the last 40 years has seen an amazing growth in information on Alberta's archaeological heritage, very little of which would have been collected without operation of Alberta's CRM program. So how are CRM requirements set? At the outset, systems for development review were rudimentary and depended on the cooperation of government departments responsible for public developments, such as highways, parks, and reservoirs, as well as other approval agencies and regional planning commissions established by the Lougheed government. Still, large numbers of developments and the activities of various sectors proceeded without review. Through consultative efforts by Historic Resource Division staff, industry's increasing acceptance of the conservation objectives of the Alberta Historical Resources Act and client education by consultants, a wider range of projects came under review through the 1980s. Setbacks occurred in the 1990s when the Klein government dismantled regional planning commissions and deregulated pipelines on Crown lands. However, in 1997, a forum held between the Archaeological Survey consultants and energy industry representatives led to development of the listing of significant historical sites and areas. The listing included known significant sites and areas, buffer zones around them, and some areas considered to have high potential. It represented a public statement of archaeological and historic concern that could be used in planning by industry, government, and researchers. Follow-up discussions with approval agencies, including the Energy Resources Conservation Board, Alberta Utilities Commission, and Alberta Sustainable Resource Development, enshrined the listing as a trigger for obtaining their approval for a wide range of industrial and commercial developments. As more sites have been found and understanding of landscape potential has grown, the listing has become increasingly comprehensive and now includes areas of significance to First Nations as a trigger for consultation requirements. Loss of the planning commissions has been partly offset with agreements for project referral with major urban municipalities and informal processes adopted by several local planning authorities. Until the year 2000, forest industry activity generally proceeded without review. Until in 1998, several forestry companies voluntarily implemented a CRM program designed by their consultants, the archaeological consultants. Shortly afterwards, Historic Resources Division issued requirements to all forestry companies to complete comparable programs. Historical Resource Division continues to work with government partners, with other approval agencies and industry groups to enhance the effectiveness of project review. While there remain areas that could be improved, systems for review of development impact have advanced markedly over the last 40 years. I just need a blank. So who does CRM archaeology? With an assessment requirement, a developer needs to find a qualified archaeologist to undertake the work. The permit regulation spells out qualifications necessary to apply successfully. These remain the same as initially enacted. They are some of the most stringent in Canada and have been questioned from time to time. But CRM work, where decisions need to be made about permanent loss of archaeological sites or large-scale financial expenditures to compensate for it, application of the highest professional standards maximizes conservation, provides assurance against potential legal action, and facilitates well-considered decision-making. Requirements for a thesis-based master's degree, supervised field and lab training, and relevant experience were often obtained by early CRM archaeologists in graduate programs offered by Canadian universities, where field schools provided experience with local sites, lab courses often used local collections, and thesis research typically focused on regionally relevant topics. Most of the CRM permit holders in the first 3 decades of the program gained their qualifications in these traditional programs. As demand for qualified permit holders increased with the new millennium, the supply of graduates from regional universities no longer met demand. This demand coincided with new academic options for master's programming in which degrees based on research papers could be obtained in 1 year, typically from British and US universities. These programs do not frequently include field schools, and lab experience was less commonly offered. The Archaeological Survey often required that first-time applicants with these qualifications acquire additional local experience before permits could be issued, or placed restrictions on the types of projects that could be taken on. These shortcomings have been addressed to varying degrees of success through time by peer mentoring in corporate employment situations. Overall, adequate preparation in archaeological programs in Canadian universities and government review of qualifications on a project-by-project basis has resulted in CRM studies by qualified archaeologists over the last 40 years. In the early 1970s, while projects were few in number, university professors and recent graduates undertook CRM studies. But the complexity of the process and the fact that the work was subject to critical review proved less attractive for academics, and the work was generally left to commercial entities. These latter took the form of incorporated individuals or small partnerships, but initially the focus of the work was only on the archaeological component of a larger set of approval requirements. Recognition that most consultants faced similar issues prompted formation of the Association of Consulting Archaeologists in 1979. Among other objectives, this organization provides a forum for discussion of contentious issues with the Archaeological Survey. In recent years, regular collaboration with the survey and the need for clarification of evolving standards of practice has brought these two organizations closer. The fact that pre-development study requirements often involve a range of disciplines prompted integrated environmental consultancies to include archaeology in the range of services offered, beginning in the late 1980s. As traditional archaeological consulting firms increased staff through the mid-1990s in response to demand, this model of providing integrated services grew, with mergers resulting in archaeologists forming subgroups within large companies. Currently, Alberta CRM archaeologists practice in a range of business contexts, from small one-person operations through small and large partnerships to large multinational corporate entities. Currently, approximately 105 permit holding archaeologists are employed in 32 companies. With increased competition and expectations from clients and government, CRM Archaeology has evolved from a boutique service into a highly professional industry since its beginnings in 1973. So how are CRM studies conducted? CRM archaeological work typically entails several stages: pre-field planning to predict where sites might occur, survey to find and evaluate threatened sites, excavation to recover materials and information that might be destroyed, and analysis and reporting as an important conservation record and to convey recommendations for decision-making. When CRM archaeology began, little was known about the prehistory of vast areas of the province. At first, prediction of landscape potential had only a small known site database to rely on. So planning required intuition based on what had been learned about past land use and university, and often benefited from information provided by avocational archaeologists and collectors. As the known site record increased, information about site distribution patterns became an important tool to refine prediction and plan studies. As mentioned earlier, this database has been the key element in development of the listing of historic resources as a tool for development planning and study requirement. But major advances in predicting archaeological potential emerged in the new millennium with development of digitized environmental databases, and use of geographic information systems, as Jerry's already mentioned, for integrating, analyzing, and displaying information. Alberta CRM archaeologists began combining known site information with vegetation, soils, slope, and other mapped environmental information using GIS to predict forestry impacts beginning in the year 2000. In the last 15 years, available environmental data have significantly expanded so that prediction of archaeological potential using GIS is commonly used in oil sands and pipeline planning and many other applications. In the early days of CRM archaeology, survey to find sites typically relied on visual observation. In open grasslands, surface features like teepee rings, cairns, and rock alignments stand out and were commonly recorded. Otherwise, natural and man-made exposures provided opportunities for site discovery. Plowed fields in agricultural areas provided excellent visibility, but typically revealed disturbed sites. In forested areas, lakeshore and creek bank exposures provided primary sources for visual inspection and were supplemented by tree throws and man-made disturbances such as trails and cut lines. In most cases, test excavations were not employed or used sparingly as a site discovery method. This approach to boreal forest archaeology changed dramatically in the 1980s when application of intensive shovel testing in the oil sands resulted in discovery of large numbers of sites. Subsequently, intensive shovel test programs have become commonplace in CRM studies throughout Alberta's forested zone. Appreciation of the potential for buried archaeological sites has also taken place in the plains. In grassland areas. Backhoe testing was first employed systematically in swales in the Nose Hill uplands in Calgary, where deeply buried kill site deposits were discovered. Today it is employed in a wide range of circumstances. When archaeological sites are identified, they need to be properly recorded. Site location, I think I've gone a little ahead. You can look at that slide for a while. Site location was initially determined using project maps and 1 to 50,000 scale government contour maps. Archaeologists placed a dot on the map and then calculated a legal location and UTM coordinates. The accuracy of this information varied considerably, having numerous sources of potential error. And still, these early records form an important resource that repeatedly demonstrates reliability. In the late 1990s, global positioning systems allowed greater accuracy in determining location for fixed objects and activities. CRM archaeologists quickly adopted this technology, using it to plot sites, dispersed features, shovel tests, and travel routes, among other things. Alberta CRM archaeologists are responsible for development of a method for quickly and accurately mapping teepee rings. In 1977, Barry Dow, working with Janice Andreas, designed and produced a large board imprinted with a 360-degree circle. When fixed to a center point in the teepee ring, the distance and bearing of each rock is found by using a tape measure, resulting in a relatively accurate map. This method has been widely adopted throughout Alberta and is used in other jurisdictions as well. In the 1980s, CRM archaeologists used heavy equipment blading to strip near-surface sediments to discover archaeological features between known stone feature sites, with considerable success in Medicine Hat and in Calgary to discover buried teepee rings. So, information recovery. Excavation is the most common form of detailed information recovery, although techniques vary on a site-by-site basis, depending on sedimentary contexts. Excavation methods have remained relatively similar throughout the span of CRM archaeology. 10-centimeter arbitrary levels within 1-meter units are typical, with finer increments, three-dimensional mapping, and natural stratigraphic levels employed in specific circumstances. The need to complete CRM excavations to tight timeframes has occasionally required this work to take place under winter conditions. Small portable shelters to cover test excavations were initially tried in 1979. But in 1980, major excavations for subdivision development in Calgary saw construction of large shelters that allowed crews to work in comfortable conditions while propane heaters kept sediments thawed. Screening of sediments in Alberta has had something of a unique history. Because of the large amount of sediment produced in the deep 1960s research excavations it had smashed in, large heavy mechanical screens driven by gasoline engines were designed. This design evolved into smaller, lighter, but cumbersome devices and has become a standard for CRM excavations throughout the Alberta plains. No other jurisdiction I know of uses this technology to the same extent. Alberta CRM archaeologists also conducted controlled surface collection as an information recovery technique in plowed fields in the early 1980s, and this is the best I could do for slides. Its most comprehensive application occurred in the Genesee Power Project west of Edmonton, where large numbers of sites occurred in regularly cultivated fields. Although a large, diverse sample was obtained, the inability to demonstrate chronological integrity and artifact concentrations inhibited interpretation potential. This technique is rarely required in more recent times. So what kind of analysis is done? Analysis in CRM archaeology typically focuses on basic description of materials recovered, with emphasis on diagnostic specimens like these. External comparison or wider-ranging consideration is often lacking, reflecting the challenges of dealing with small sample sizes, sparse, widely dispersed sites, compromised stratigraphy, or the absence of diagnostic materials. Still, basic description has value as a building block for more in-depth subsequent study. When large samples have been obtained, treatment of non-diagnostic material is typically provided in summary form, identifying technological class and material type for lithic and historic period detritus, and elements and species for bone. External comparison of these data are often difficult because of inconsistency in the categories used. In many notable situations, however, when large samples have been recovered from intact sites with complex occupation sequences, analysis and interpretation in CRM projects have made important contributions to Alberta history and prehistory. Beyond basic description, CRM analyses often include radiocarbon dating of suitable material, which is now regularly required, whereas previously consultants often had to convince clients of its utility. Some consultants also routinely obtain blood residue assessments of specimens they feel may be informative. Tree ring dating has occasionally been used to identify the age of historic Aboriginal activities. In large aerial studies, some analyses have attempted statistical, spatial, or artifact attribute analysis. So, reporting and review. As required, the results of CRM archaeological studies are conveyed in a report. When the CRM program was initiated, reports were typewritten with hand-drafted maps, black and white photos mounted within pages, and outsized maps in back pockets. When revisions were required, entire reports often had to be retyped. In 2004, the Archaeological Survey began requiring reports and site forms in digital form. The consultants had already embraced the use of computer-based report production, integrating word processing and computer graphic and photo production programs. Report review has always been a source of friction between the Archaeological Survey and consultants. This was especially the case in the first decade of the CRM program, when submissions from academics were being critically reviewed and was aggravated by the lack of specific direction in the existing legislation. So in 1989, the Archaeological Survey released comprehensive guidelines for permit holders encompassing all stages of the CRM process and including reporting. It and periodic releases of updates through the 1990s provided needed direction to archaeologists and consistency for report reviews. As a result, tensions diminished and the program took on a more professional foundation. So how is information archived and made available? When the CRM program began, all records archived at the survey were produced on paper. When archaeologists wanted to review existing records, they had to go to the survey to read and or make copies of information they needed. In 1984, the Archaeological Survey began making microfiche copies of reports available to universities, museums, and consultants. Earlier, the survey began annual publication of the Archaeology in Alberta series of the occasional paper commonly referred to as the Blue Book. It featured summary papers of notable CRM and research projects, short descriptions of each completed project, and a listing of permits, of all permits issued that year. Together, these efforts made CRM reports available and brought CRM studies and results to the attention of an interested public. Despite its significant benefits, the Blue Book series was canceled during the 1990s cutback and is only now being revived. In 2004, the process of digitizing existing paper reports and site documents began. The Archaeological Survey now maintains a complete digital archive of available reports and site information that can be accessed remotely by anyone agreeing to principles of confidentiality. I'll show you that this is just the entry screen for that work. Furthermore, a selected site file information can now be displayed and analyzed online using GIS technology. The term gray literature no longer applies to Alberta CRM archaeological study results. So what are the results of CRM archaeology? Large numbers of archaeological sites have been identified as a result of Alberta CRM studies. This chart shows sites recorded since the beginning of the program in 1973. They range in value from isolated finds to large multi-component prehistoric campsites and kills, or historic settlements and abandoned industrial sites. In an earlier version of this paper, I thought I could mention some key sites and projects that illustrate specific contributions to Alberta's archaeological record, but time limitations and the size of the database make this completely impractical. A partial impression of the contribution many of them have made to understanding Alberta's past is evident in the Plains prehistory summaries authored by Vickers in 1984 and Peck recently. So what have we learned? As well as specific contributions, CRM studies have made many general contributions to Alberta archaeology since the inception of the program. Because study locations were based on development decisions, and much more of the Alberta landscape has been examined than would ever have been selected for academic research. Consequently, we've learned a great deal about the broad character and wide distribution of Alberta's archaeological record. Of the more than 39,000 archaeological sites illustrated in this slide, 25,500 and some odd have been recorded during CRM study. The basic structure of Alberta Plains and Eastern Slopes prehistory remains as initially defined by Richard Forbes and Barney Reeves in the late 1960s. But the CRM program has been largely responsible for adjustment and clarification of the details. As demonstrated by Trevor Peck's recent publication, we can now provide a concrete and nuanced narrative of Southern Alberta prehistory. While a foundation in radiocarbon dating is still lacking, CRM work in northeastern Alberta has materially advanced our understanding of the prehistory of the North, and we'll hear about that soon. Through application of intensive shovel test programs, we have significantly increased site recovery in forested environments and have learned the importance of topographic variation and site distribution patterns. Through informed use of mechanical deep testing and depositional environments in the plains and the southern foothills, we've been able to recover significant, well-preserved sites not previously discoverable. By adherence to the principles defined in legislation and the professional standards outlined in the related guidelines, we have preserved a well-documented record of studies undertaken and an archive of material recovered that is of tremendous value for future study. And although it has taken some time, digital technology has enabled us to supply the written portion and aspects of the spatial portion of this record online for research purposes. And since I'm about at the end of the half an hour, I think I'll end it there. Thank you.